They thought I was dying. Maybe part of me was. I remember the smell of disinfectant, the cold taste of oxygen, and the sound of my grandson whispering, "He won't make it through the night." They didn't know I was awake. They didn't know I could hear every word. And they sure as hell didn't know I'd still be alive to watch what they did next. You never really know how people see you until they think you're gone. My name's Tom Weaver, 78 years old. I've lived my whole life on Weaver Acres, 200 acres of stubborn Illinois soil that never gave anything easy. My father built the barn with his own hands in 1947. My wife, Ellen, painted the kitchen yellow because she said sunlight should live inside too. We raised 2 kids there, buried 1. Every board, every field, every scar on that land has a story. So, when I woke up in a hospital bed after my heart attack, tubes everywhere, chest aching like someone had parked a truck on it, I told myself I'd fight, because I still had things left to protect. That was before I saw the look on my grandson's face. Ryan, 35, polished shoes, phone in his hand, eyes full of calculations instead of tears. My daughter Carol stood beside him, wringing her hands. "Dad," she said, soft like you talk to a child, "you should focus on resting. The doctors say it's a miracle you made it through surgery." Miracle or punishment, I wasn't sure yet. I stayed quiet, listened. That's something you learn when you get old. Talk less, watch more. They spoke near the window, thinking morphine made me deaf. "If he doesn't recover fully, we'll have to decide about the property," Ryan said. "Taxes alone are bleeding us." Carol's voice trembled. "It's his home." "It's an asset," he corrected. "An asset." That word hit harder than any heart attack. 2 weeks later, they transferred me to rehab. My hands were shaking, but my ears worked fine. Nurses talked about progress, about hope. Ryan visited once, brought flowers that smelled like guilt. "You look stronger, Grandpa," he said. "Just hang in there, okay?" He smiled the way people smile at funerals, polite, temporary. When he left, I noticed he'd taken my house keys off the chain on my bedside table. I knew then something was coming. It was mid-May when they told me I could go home in a few days. I hadn't felt sunlight in weeks. I imagined sitting on my porch again, listening to the wind through the corn rows. I wanted to see the barn, smell the soil, maybe talk to Ellen's grave like I always did when the world got too loud. But the day before my discharge, Carol walked in alone, carrying a clipboard and a look that didn't belong to my daughter. "Dad, there's something we need to discuss," she said. Her tone had that rehearsed calm people use before detonating a bomb. "Ryan found a buyer for the farm." I stared at her. "A buyer?" My throat felt dry, sandpaper against glass. "What buyer?" She avoided my eyes. "It's a good offer. You can live comfortably. You'll have funds for care, for anything you need." I reached for the table, trying to steady myself. "Care? I need my land, Carol. That's my care. That's my heir." She sighed. "Please don't make this harder. The paperwork's already started. Ryan handled it through a trust." "So legally?" "Legally?" I laughed, sharp and hollow. "You mean you sold my home while I was half dead in a hospital bed?" Her eyes filled with tears. "You weren't supposed to find out yet. We didn't think—" "No," I interrupted, voice cracking like old wood. "You didn't think at all." She left crying. I sat there until the nurse came in and found my heart monitor screaming again. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the clock tick past midnight and made myself a promise. They might own the papers, but I owned the truth. That farm was more than dirt. It was the proof that a man could build something out of nothing and still call it his when everything else failed. When they discharged me 3 days later, Ryan insisted on driving me home, but when we turned onto the county road, my gut twisted. The old wooden mailbox that said Weaver Acres was gone, replaced by a shiny metal one that read Stone Ridge Development Company. The gravel driveway I'd spread myself was lined with bright orange stakes marking survey boundaries. There were fresh tire tracks, and a sign staked into the ground that made my vision blur. Future site of Stone Ridge Estates. Luxury homes starting at $650,000. My hands shook so bad I dropped my cane. Ryan parked near the porch like nothing was wrong. "It's progress, Grandpa," he said quietly. "You'll be taken care of. You can live with me and—" I slapped his arm before he could finish. Not hard, just enough to make him stop talking. You sold my wife's grave for a swimming pool. He flinched. They'll move the headstone respectfully. You'll get compensation. Compensation? My voice broke. Boy, you can't buy back a lifetime. He said nothing, just looked away toward the fields, or what was left of them. That evening, Carol tried to talk me down, said it was too late, said the contracts were binding. But I was already somewhere else in my mind, back to when Ellen and I planted the first apple tree, when my boy learned to ride a bike down that dirt lane, when the barn caught fire in '83 and the whole town showed up to rebuild it. You can't sell memories, but you can sure as hell reclaim them. When they dropped me off at Ryan's house, just for a while, I smiled politely, thanked them for dinner, waited till midnight, then slipped out the back door with the one thing they'd forgotten, my spare truck keys. The old Chevy still sat behind their garage, rusted but loyal. I started it with a cough and a prayer. As the headlights hit the dark road leading back to Weaver Acres, my heart didn't feel weak anymore. I wasn't the dying man they thought I was. I was a farmer, a husband, a father who'd buried too many things to let his land be next. They'd taken my home, but by morning, they'd learned something else. You can't sell what isn't truly yours, not while I'm still breathing. And I was very much alive. I drove through the night with the windows open, letting the cold air keep me awake. The road to Weaver Acres was muscle memory. My hands knew every turn even when my eyes blurred from tears. When the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, I pulled into what used to be my driveway. The dew sparkled on the grass, but half the pasture was already flattened by heavy machinery. The gate was chained shut. A brand new padlock hung there, shining in the morning light like a challenge. I sat in the truck and just stared at it. A week ago, that gate had been mine. I'd built it from scrap oak after the storm of '94. My initials were still burned into the post, TW. I touched them with trembling fingers. Guess they forgot to sand you off, old friend, I whispered. I found a crowbar behind the seat. The metal screamed when I pried the lock open, a sound that felt like justice. I drove through and parked beside the barn, or what was left of it. The red paint had peeled to gray, and someone had nailed a no trespassing sign over Ellen's hand-painted welcome. I hobbled inside, my cane sinking into the dusty floor. Sunlight streamed through the gaps, cutting the darkness into ribbons. It still smelled like hay and motor oil, faint but familiar. I ran my hand over the old tractor. The seat was torn, the engine cold, but I swear I could still hear her running. I'd taught my son to drive on that tractor. He'd pretended not to be afraid, gripping the wheel like he was holding the world. Progress, I muttered. That's what they call erasing your own blood. I climbed the hill behind the barn to where Ellen was buried. The grass there was overgrown. Wildflowers tangled around the small white fence I'd built. But there was another sign hammered into the ground, bright orange and cruelly cheerful. Phase 1, Lot 3. That's when I broke. I dropped to my knees in the wet grass, my chest heaving. Ellen, I whispered, they're selling you. Selling everything we built. I tried to be the man you'd remember, but I let them do this while I was lying in a hospital bed. A robin landed on the fence post beside me, cocked its head, and sang like the world wasn't ending. I took it as a sign. I wasn't leaving. For 2 days I lived in that broken house, eating canned beans and sleeping on a dusty couch. Every noise in the distance made me tense. Trucks came and went at the edge of the property, but no one came near the farmhouse. On the third morning, a black SUV pulled up. Ryan stepped out in a suit, holding a clipboard. "Grandpa?" His voice wavered when he saw me on the porch. You can't be here." I stood slowly, gripping my cane like a rifle. "Why not? Last I checked, my name's still carved into the barn door." He sighed. "Look, I know you're angry, but the sale is final. It's done." "We didn't have a choice." "You always have a choice," I said. "You just picked the one with the biggest paycheck." He looked down at his shoes. "You don't understand the taxes, the upkeep, the debt." "I understand plenty," I interrupted. "I paid off that mortgage before you were born. If there's debt now, it's because you made it." Ryan flinched. "Grandpa, please, you're trespassing. If the developers find you here, they could press charges?" I laughed, bitter and raw. "Let them? I'll tell them the truth, that the people who sold them this land had no right to it. His expression changed. What do you mean? I mean, you sold it through a trust without power of attorney, I said. You forged my consent. Color drained from his face. Who told you that? Your mother, I said softly. She cried when she realized what you'd done. Ryan stepped closer. Grandpa, it's not what you think. I had to. You were dying. The bills... I was living, I shouted, the sound echoing through the empty fields. I was fighting, and you turned my fight into a payday. He froze. I could see something flicker behind his eyes, shame or maybe fear. Then he looked away, jaw tight. It's too late. The land belongs to Stone Ridge now. Then I'll talk to Stone Ridge, I said. Grandpa, they're not going to listen to you. They've already started permits. I smiled faintly. Then I'll make them listen. He hesitated, as if seeing me for the first time, not as a fragile old man, but as someone he'd underestimated. You're going to get yourself hurt. Maybe, I said, but I'll do it standing on my own land. He left without another word. Dust followed his SUV down the driveway like a ghost trail. That night, I sat in the barn with a lantern, going through an old metal box Ellen had kept under the floorboards. Inside were the original property deeds, yellowed and fragile, with her neat handwriting marking every addition. My name, Thomas Weaver, stood alone on the ownership line. No joint deed, no transfer, no trust. I spent the rest of the night copying every page, careful and slow. When the sun rose, I drove to town in my old Chevy. The tires hummed on the asphalt like they remembered the road. At the courthouse, the clerk looked surprised to see me. Mr. Weaver, we heard you'd passed. Not yet, I said, and I'm here to prove it. She smiled awkwardly, then frowned as I spread the papers on the counter. That's the original deed, she said. Damn right it is, I replied, and I want to see the transfer documents your office recorded last month. She tapped on her keyboard, then frowned deeper. Sir, there's something odd. The signature on this transfer doesn't match yours. I leaned closer. Show me. She turned the screen. My name was there, Thomas Weaver, but the scrawl looked nothing like mine. My heart pounded. That's not my signature, I said. The clerk nodded slowly. Then someone forged a legal transfer. I looked up at her. Can we prove it? She smiled faintly. If you're as alive as you claim, Mr. Weaver, then yes, we can. I walked out of that courthouse with my heart thundering, not from fear this time, but from purpose. I wasn't just fighting for land anymore. I was fighting for my name. That evening, I parked on the hill again, watching the sunset burn over the fields. The machines were gone for the weekend, silent and still. The sign for Stone Ridge Estates fluttered in the wind. I pulled it out of the ground, threw it into the truck bed, and whispered, You started a war you don't understand, boy. Ryan thought I was weak, that an old man couldn't stand against lawyers and developers. He'd forgotten something my father once told me the day he handed me the first deed. Tom, he said, land doesn't belong to whoever buys it. It belongs to whoever loves it enough to bleed for it. And I had plenty of fight left in me. The papers proved what I already knew. My family had stolen from me. But proving it in court would take time, and time was one thing I might not have much of. So I decided to move faster. I made one phone call that night, to the only person who'd ever stood by me when everyone else turned away. Tom, the voice said on the other end, rough and warm. Didn't expect to hear from you again. Need a favor, Eddie, I said. A big one. What kind of favor? The kind that involves making a few people very uncomfortable. Eddie chuckled. You always did have a taste for trouble. Where do we start? I looked out across the dark fields that used to be mine, with a shovel and a story that's about to change everything. Eddie showed up 2 nights later in his old Dodge pickup, headlights off, the way we used to when sneaking out to hunt rabbits as kids. The same grin, just framed by more gray hair. You look like hell, Tom, he said, climbing out. I've been to hell, I replied, and it looks a lot like my own damn front yard. He laughed softly, then his face turned serious as he looked around the property. They're really doing it, huh? Selling it piece by piece, I said. But they made one mistake. They forgot I'm still alive. Eddie leaned against the truck. So what's the plan? You said something about a shovel. I pointed toward the big oak tree near the old well, the one Ellen and I planted when we first moved here. Remember what I buried under there after the fire in '83? He frowned, thinking. You mean that lockbox with the insurance papers? And more, I said. We grabbed shovels from the barn and started digging under the moonlight. My heart pounded, not from the work, but from the memories. The night the barn burned down, the smell of smoke and rain, Ellen crying in my arms as we promised we'd rebuild. I'd hidden the lockbox that same night, just in case. When the shovel finally hit metal, I dropped to my knees. We pulled it out and pried it open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were documents yellowed by time, the insurance payout check stub, the bank statements, even the land survey map signed by my father. But at the bottom was something I'd forgotten. Ellen's handwritten note. If you're reading this, Tom, it means something went wrong. Remember, the truth always leaves a paper trail. Don't let them take what you bled for. I swallowed hard. Eddie put a hand on my shoulder. She always knew you'd have to fight again. I nodded, wiping my eyes. She was right, and these papers, these prove I never transferred ownership, not once. By dawn, we'd copied everything and locked it in the glove compartment of Eddie's truck. You think this'll hold up? He asked. It'll do more than that, I said. It'll bury them before they bury me. That morning, I called the county clerk. This is Thomas Weaver. I'd like to file a fraud complaint. The woman on the other end hesitated. Mr. Weaver, are you sure you want to go that route? It'll get messy. Messy's fine, I said. They already made it personal. Within 24 hours, I had a meeting scheduled with the sheriff. When I walked into that office with Eddie carrying the lockbox like a sacred relic, the deputies stared like they were seeing a ghost. Mr. Weaver, the sheriff said, shaking my hand. Heard you passed away last month. I got better, I said dryly. He chuckled, then frowned at the papers. You're accusing your grandson of forgery? I'm not accusing, I said. I'm proving. He took the documents, studying the signatures. We'll have to verify all this, but if you're right, he whistled softly. That's a serious felony. Eddie grinned. Told you he's still got fight left in him. The sheriff nodded. We'll start with the notary who witnessed the sale. By afternoon, they'd tracked her down. Her testimony was short and brutal. Ryan Weaver signed everything, said his grandfather was incapacitated and couldn't attend. I just notarized what I was told was approved by the family. The sheriff called me that evening. You were right, Tom. The signatures don't match. We'll be opening a criminal investigation. For the first time in weeks, I felt air fill my lungs like it used to. But victory has a strange taste when it comes at the cost of family. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, staring at the horizon. The fields were dark silhouettes against a silver sky. I thought about Carol, my daughter caught between loyalty and guilt, and Ryan, the boy I'd taught to fish, to drive, to never lie. Somewhere along the line, he'd learned that shortcuts were easier than honesty. Eddie came out carrying 2 beers. To survival, he said, raising one. I clinked his bottle. To reckoning. He chuckled. So what now? You gonna take him to court? Court's the easy part, I said. What comes next is harder. What's that? Forgiving my own blood. The next morning, a shiny white SUV pulled up again. Carol stepped out this time, her face pale and drawn. Dad, she said quietly, we need to talk. She looked smaller somehow, like the truth had already started weighing her down. Come on up, I said, nodding toward the porch. She sat across from me, hands trembling in her lap. Ryan told me the sheriff came by. They're saying he forged your signature. They're not saying it, I said. They proved it. Tears filled her eyes. Dad, he thought you were dying. He was desperate. The bills... Desperation doesn't sign another man's name, I said softly. And bills don't justify betrayal. I know, she whispered. I told him it was wrong. But he said he'd fix everything once the development money came through. Fix everything by paving over his grandmother's grave. She flinched, covering her mouth. He's just lost, Dad. Please don't send him to jail. I looked away, the ache in my chest returning. Not the heart kind, but the kind no doctor can cure. Carol, I'm not the one who decides that now. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Then do what you always did. Be the man who saves this family." I stared at her, remembering her as a little girl running barefoot through the fields, hair full of sunlight. I wanted to believe she still existed somewhere inside this woman, begging me to protect her son. "I'll think about it," I said finally. When she left, I walked down to Ellen's grave. The wind was cold and sharp, carrying the smell of rain. "You'd tell me to forgive," I whispered. "But how do I forgive someone who tried to erase us?" The storm came that night, lightning cracking across the sky, thunder rolling like judgment. I stood in the barn doorway, watching sheets of rain hammer the land. Then headlights appeared on the road. A single car stopped at the gate. Ryan stepped out, soaked, clutching something under his coat. He walked toward me slowly, his hair plastered to his forehead, eyes hollow. "Grandpa," he said, voice shaking, "I didn't come to fight." I didn't move. "Then why are you here?" "To give you this." He pulled out a folder and handed it to me. Inside were printed contracts, unsigned. The final sale documents, they were supposed to close tomorrow. I stopped it. I stared at him. "Why?" "Because you were right," he said. "I lost my way. I thought I was saving us, but I was saving myself." He rubbed his face with trembling hands. "They're investigating me, aren't they?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "I'll tell them the truth." The rain dripped off his chin, and for the first time in years, I saw the scared little boy who used to follow me through the fields, asking endless questions about the world. "Come inside," I said. He hesitated. "You're not angry?" "Oh, I'm angry," I said, "but I'm also tired. Let's dry off before we talk about what comes next." Inside, by the flickering lantern, Ryan stared at the old photographs on the wall, me and Ellen on our wedding day, Carol as a child, the barn raising in 1970. His voice cracked. "I forgot what this place meant." "You can forget a lot chasing money," I said. "But you can remember too, if you try." He nodded. "I'll make it right." "Words are cheap," I said quietly. "Actions count." He looked me in the eyes. "Then give me a chance to prove it." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside that old house, for the first time in a long while, I felt something fragile and real. Hope trying to take root again in damaged soil. Still, I knew forgiveness wasn't the end of this story. Not yet. The developers wouldn't walk away quietly. And somewhere in the city, contracts and lawyers were still moving like vultures circling the last piece of meat. Ryan might have come clean, but I'd spent 78 years learning one simple truth. You don't stop a storm by hoping. You stop it by standing in it. The morning after the storm, the fields glistened like glass. The rain had washed away the dust and the tire marks, but not the damage. Half the fences were down, the barn roof was leaking again, and the air smelled like wet earth and betrayal. Ryan had fallen asleep in the armchair by the window, still wearing his damp clothes. I watched him as the sun rose. His face looked softer in the light. Not the cold, hardened man who'd sold me out, but the boy who used to follow me barefoot through the mud, chasing frogs near the creek. For a moment, I almost believed we could start over. Then the crunch of tires on gravel shattered the quiet. A white Land Rover pulled up near the porch. 2 men in dark suits stepped out, umbrellas in hand, followed by a woman with a clipboard. They looked too clean for this place. "Mr. Weaver," the woman called, her tone professional but sharp. "We're from Stone Ridge Development. We've been trying to reach you." Ryan stirred awake and rubbed his eyes. "They weren't supposed to come yet," he muttered. I walked out onto the porch, cane tapping the wet wood. "You're trespassing," I said. The woman smiled, that thin corporate smile that never reaches the eyes. "Actually, sir, under the pending sale agreement, this property is scheduled for preliminary inspection today." "Pending doesn't mean complete," I replied. "And last I checked, it's hard to sell land when the owner isn't dead yet." Her smile froze. "There must be some misunderstanding. We have signed documentation." "Forged documentation," I cut in. "You'll want to talk to the county sheriff about that. He's investigating." One of the men, taller than the rest, took a step forward. "Mr. Weaver, I think it would be best if you didn't complicate this process. Stone Ridge has already invested considerable funds. We could make this very unpleasant." I laughed. "Son, I've buried friends, survived wars, and outlived 3 heart attacks. You can't make it unpleasant enough to scare me." Ryan came to stand beside me. "He's telling the truth," he said. "The documents were forged. I forged them." The woman blinked, clearly not expecting that. "Excuse me?" "I faked his signature," Ryan said quietly. "I thought he was dying. I thought I was helping. But I wasn't. I was stealing." A long silence hung in the wet air. Then the woman straightened her clipboard. "I see. Well, this changes things. The company will need to consult legal counsel." "Do that," I said, "and tell them to take their sign off my field while they're at it." They exchanged looks, then got back in their SUV. As they drove away, Ryan exhaled shakily. "They'll sue me," he whispered. "They might," I said. "But you can live with a lawsuit. You can't live with a lie." He nodded, staring down the empty road. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," I said softly. "But forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something you learn." We spent the next few days cleaning what was left of the place. The storm had knocked down half the orchard, and the old tractor refused to start. But working side by side again, me slow and stubborn, him quiet and ashamed, felt like a kind of healing. On the third day, Carol came back. Her eyes were red, and she held a folder under her arm. "Dad," she said carefully, "I spoke with the lawyers. The sale's officially frozen until the investigation's done." "Good," I said. "Now, maybe I can die in peace someday. Just not yet." She tried to smile, but couldn't quite manage it. "Ryan told me what he did. He told me you forgave him." "I didn't say that," I replied. "I said I'd think about it." Ryan came out of the barn, grease on his hands. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm sorry." Carol's voice broke. "You almost destroyed us." "I know," he said. "I'm trying to fix it." They stood there in the mud, mother and son, the distance between them stretching across years of pride and silence. I turned away to give them privacy, but I could hear the sobs, the kind that come when love and guilt finally meet halfway. Later that evening, while the sky turned orange, I sat on the porch with an old notebook in my lap, Ellen's journal. She'd written everything in it: harvest numbers, grocery lists, little notes about the kids, and thoughts she never said aloud. On one yellowed page, dated 1991, she'd written, "If the land ever leaves our hands, it won't be because we stopped loving it. It'll be because we stopped loving each other." That line hit me like a hammer. Maybe that's what had really gone wrong. It wasn't greed, it was distance. Years of not talking, of letting money and pride fill the space where love used to live. I closed the journal and whispered, "I hear you, Ellen." The next morning, I drove into town with Ryan. We walked into the sheriff's office together. The man looked up from his desk. "Morning, Mr. Weaver," and "Mr. Weaver." Ryan swallowed hard. "Sheriff, I'm here to make a statement." He confessed everything: how he'd forged the papers, lied to the notary, and pushed the sale through while I was in the hospital. His voice shook, but he didn't hide behind excuses. When he finished, the sheriff nodded solemnly. "You understand this could lead to charges?" "Yes," Ryan said, "but I can't keep pretending I'm someone I'm not." The sheriff looked at me. "Do you want to press charges, Tom?" The room went silent. Ryan's eyes were wet but steady. I could have said yes, I had every right to, but I saw my reflection in his, the same tired guilt, the same desperate need to make things right. "No," I said finally. "What I want is for my grandson to remember who he is." The sheriff nodded. "I'll mark the case resolved pending further verification, but the development company's still under review. They'll back off for now." We walked out into the cold sunlight. Ryan's shoulders shook with relief. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," I replied. "Thank the woman who taught me that mercy's not weakness." "Grandma," he whispered. I nodded. For a few weeks, life felt quiet again, peaceful almost. Ryan stayed to help with repairs, and Carol came on weekends, bringing food and old photos. We laughed more than we cried, which felt like progress. The farm was alive again, though barely. One step from being lost, one breath from redemption. Then, one Friday evening, a black envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. Just my name written in elegant script. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Notice of eminent domain proceedings, filed by Stone Ridge Development Co. They weren't done after all. Ryan looked at me, face pale. They're trying to take it by force. I crumpled the paper in my fist. Then they just made this war official. The sun dipped behind the hills, and the sky burned red. I stood there on the porch, the letter shaking in my hand, my heart pounding with something fierce and familiar. They thought they could steal from a dying man. But I wasn't dying. Not yet. The letter sat on the kitchen table like a loaded gun. Eminent domain. 3 words that could erase a lifetime faster than a heart attack. They were claiming my land for public benefit. New roads, new housing, new tax revenue. Funny how greed always dressed itself up as progress. Ryan paced back and forth across the kitchen. They can't do this, he said. They can't just take it. They can try, I said, staring at the letter. But we're not going to make it easy for them. He stopped pacing. How do you fight a company like Stone Ridge, Grandpa? They've got lawyers, lobbyists. And I've got something they don't, I said. A story. He frowned. A story? People don't fight for paperwork, boy. They fight for meaning, for roots. That's what this land has. It's not just acres and fences. It's history. I stood slowly, my knees popping like firecrackers. You still have that fancy phone? Of course. Good, we're going to use it. The next morning, Ryan recorded me standing by the barn. The wind was cutting, the sky steel gray. I told my story straight to the camera, how my father built this place after the war, how my wife painted the kitchen yellow because she said the son should live inside too, how my grandson forged my signature while I was in the hospital but came back to make it right. Then I held up the letter. Now a company wants to take this land in the name of progress, but progress built on lies is just destruction with a prettier name. This farm is more than dirt. It's memory, family, forgiveness. And I'll stand on it till the last breath leaves my body. When we posted the video online, I didn't expect much. But by sunset, it had over 50,000 views. By midnight, 100,000. Comments poured in. Farmers, veterans, teachers, people from every corner of the country saying the same thing. Don't give up, Tom. We're with you. By morning, reporters were calling. Carol nearly dropped her coffee when she saw my face on the local news. Dad, you've gone viral, she said. I grinned. Guess the internet likes old men with grudges. Ryan shook his head, half laughing, half terrified. You just painted a target on us. Good, I said. Now they can't bulldoze me quietly. 3 days later, Stone Ridge sent a representative. A young lawyer, sharp suit, colder smile. He stepped out of a silver sedan like he owned the world. Mr. Weaver, he said, extending a hand I didn't take. I'm Matthew Pierce, counsel for Stone Ridge Development. Counsel, I repeated. That what they're calling executioners now? He didn't flinch. I'm here to find a peaceful resolution. The company is prepared to offer a substantial settlement, 5 times the current market value. 5 times 0 is still 0, I said. You can't buy what isn't for sale. Ryan stood beside me, filming quietly. Pierce noticed. You're recording this? For transparency, Ryan said. People deserve to see how progress works. Pierce's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake, Mr. Weaver. Public opinion doesn't stop legal proceedings. Maybe not, I said, but it sure makes them look uglier. He sighed, tucking his papers back into his briefcase. We'll proceed with the claim. Expect a court summons. As his car disappeared down the road, I felt something deep in my chest. Not fear this time, but fire. Ellen used to say anger is like a storm. It can destroy or it can clear the air. This storm was long overdue. The first hearing was held in June. The courthouse was packed. Farmers, neighbors, reporters, even school kids holding handmade signs that said, "Save Weaver Acres." When I walked in, the room went quiet. I wasn't a man anymore. I was a symbol, though I never asked to be one. The Stone Ridge lawyer presented a slideshow of blueprints and profit charts. He talked about revitalizing the region and boosting local commerce. Not once did he mention the word home. When it was my turn, I didn't bother with notes. I just looked at the judge and said, Your Honor, this land has buried 3 generations of weavers. If they want to take it, they'll have to dig up our ghosts too. There was laughter in the crowd, then applause. The judge banged her gavel. Order. But I saw the faintest smile tug at her mouth. Stone Ridge had money, I had momentum, and sometimes that's enough. The hearing dragged on for hours. The company argued eminent domain gave them every right. My lawyer, an old friend of Eddie's named Sam, argued the process was corrupt, built on forged documents and deceit. When the judge called for a recess, Ryan and I stepped outside. He looked at me like he was seeing something new. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "you're not just fighting for the farm, are you?" "No," I said. "I'm fighting for us, for what we forgot." He nodded. "Then we'll win." But the fight was far from over. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the creak of the old house. Every sound felt like a heartbeat from the past. The tick of the clock Ellen had loved, the groan of the wind through the eaves, the distant cry of a coyote. On the table lay a photograph. Me, Ellen, little Carol, and baby Ryan sitting on a hay bale, all sunburnt smiles and dirty hands. I traced the edges with my thumb, feeling every wrinkle of time. I thought about how easy it had been for Ryan to forge that signature. Just a few strokes of a pen, and everything we'd built almost vanished. But what they never understood, what maybe I never fully understood myself, was that love, once rooted deep enough, doesn't die. It endures through mistakes, through betrayal, through greed and guilt. It waits for you to remember it. And now I had. The next morning, a convoy of cars rolled down the gravel road. Reporters, activists, even a few politicians who smelled opportunity. They wanted interviews, quotes, photos of the old man who defied progress. I wasn't interested in fame, but I knew every camera helped. So I stood by Ellen's grave again, the grass freshly cut, the sky wide and blue, and I said, "If progress means paving over memory, then maybe we've forgotten what it means to move forward." That line ended up everywhere. Newspapers, talk shows, even a late-night monologue. Suddenly, Stone Ridge wasn't just fighting an old farmer. They were fighting a movement. And that's when they made their next mistake. Late one evening, just as the sun dipped behind the hills, a bulldozer rolled up the road. Unannounced, unauthorized, and very loud. Ryan ran out first. "They can't do this," he shouted. The driver ignored him. "I got orders, kid. Start clearing the east field." I stepped in front of the machine. The engine roared, and the ground trembled beneath my boots. The driver hesitated, eyes wide. "Move!" he yelled over the noise. "Not an inch," I said. Ryan pulled out his phone, streaming live. "You're on camera," he shouted. "You touch him, you're on the news tomorrow." The driver cursed, killed the engine, and climbed down. "Fine, I'm not paid enough for this." As he walked away, Ryan's live stream numbers exploded. Thousands watched an old man stand in front of a bulldozer with nothing but a cane and conviction. When the headlights faded, I turned to Ryan. My legs were shaking. "Well," I said, "guess I'm famous now?" He laughed through tears. "Grandpa, you're unstoppable." "Not unstoppable," I said, leaning on my cane. "Just too damn stubborn to quit." But deep down, I knew this standoff wasn't the end. Because when money loses in the daylight, it always comes back in the dark, and I could feel the storm gathering again. The storm broke 2 nights later. Not the kind that rattles windows, the kind that changes everything. It started with headlights at the edge of the field, cutting through the darkness like knives. Then the sound of engines. 2 trucks, 3 men, flashlights sweeping across the barn. Ryan was asleep on the couch. I touched his shoulder. "Up," I whispered. "They're here." He blinked, confused. "Who?" "Stone Ridge," I said. "And this time, they're not bringing lawyers." We watched from the porch as the men walked toward the barn. One carried a can of fuel, another a crowbar. The third, older, barked orders under his breath. I didn't need to hear the words. I knew what they were planning. Ryan's jaw tightened. "We should call the sheriff." I shook my head. "We will, after we give them something to answer for." I picked up my old Winchester from behind the door, the same one my father used to keep coyotes off the hens. My hands shook, but not from fear. "You stay behind me," I said. We stepped into the night. The air smelled like wet soil and gasoline. "Evening, boys," I said loudly. My voice carried across the field, calm and low. "You lost?" The men froze. One of them, the one with the fuel can, swore under his breath. The older one tried to smile. "Just checking on the property, old man. Safety inspection?" I raised the rifle slightly. "Funny kind of safety that comes with a lighter." Ryan lifted his phone, flashlight on, recording. "You're trespassing on private land. The sheriff's already investigating you." The leader cursed and turned to leave. "You can't prove that you tried to burn a man's home to the ground?" Ryan said, panning the camera to the fuel can. "Looks like proof to me." They drove off into the night, tires spitting mud. I lowered the rifle slowly, my heart pounding. Ryan looked at me, breathless. "You think they'll come back?" "Oh, they will," I said. "But next time, they'll come wearing suits again." By morning, the video had gone viral. Again. Over 500,000 views before breakfast. "Developers caught attempting arson against elderly farmer," the headline read. Stone Ridge's PR team scrambled to deny it, but the damage was done. That afternoon, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Weaver?" a woman's voice said, crisp and composed. "This is Laura Hastings, counsel for Stone Ridge. I represent the company now that Mr. Pierce has been relieved of his duties." "Relieved, huh?" I said. "You mean fired." A pause. "We'd like to discuss an amicable resolution. The board is prepared to rescind all claims to your property if you agree to withdraw public allegations of misconduct." I chuckled. "So you burn my barn and then offer me silence money?" "Mr. Weaver," she said, her tone tight, "we're offering peace." "Peace doesn't come from paper," I said. "It comes from truth." There was a long pause. Then quietly she said, "You've made quite a mess for powerful people, Mr. Weaver." "Good," I said, and hung up. 2 days later, the sheriff came by. He stood on the porch, hat in hand, the morning sun glinting off his badge. "Tom," he said, "you're not going to believe this, but Stone Ridge just pulled out completely. Investors gone, permits revoked. They're done." I blinked. "Done?" "Yep. Seems your story scared 'em worse than any court could. Folks in 3 counties are calling you a hero." I laughed until my chest hurt. "Hero? I'm just a man too damn old to move." He grinned. "Sometimes that's all a hero is." When he left, I sat on the porch for a long time, watching the wind roll through the cornfields. The air was clean again. The land was quiet. Alive. Ryan came out carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He sat beside me, silent for a while. "You really did it," he said finally. "You saved it." I sipped my coffee, staring at the horizon. "No, we did it. You came back. That's what matters most." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," I said softly. "But I need to give it to you anyway. That's how I move on." He wiped his eyes and laughed weakly. "Grandpa, you know this place could be worth millions if we ever—" I turned to him sharply and he stopped mid-sentence. "If we ever what?" He smiled sheepishly. "If we ever decide to build something honest here, something that gives back." I smiled. "Now you're talking sense." A month passed. Reporters stopped calling. The weeds began to grow again, where the orange stakes had been ripped out. Carol visited often, bringing homemade pies and quiet apologies. Sometimes I'd catch Ryan out by the orchard, sketching plans in a notebook. "What are you working on?" I asked one day. He showed me the page, a design for a small retreat center, cabins nestled under the trees. Weaver Acres, recovery and renewal. "I want it to be a place for people to heal," he said. "Veterans, farmers, folks who've lost everything like I almost did." "You taught me that land isn't about money. It's about what it gives back." I stared at the drawing for a long moment. Ellen would have cried if she'd seen it. "That's a good dream, boy," I said. "Make it real." By autumn, the first volunteers had shown up. Neighbors, old friends, even strangers who'd followed our story online. We painted the barn red again, rebuilt the roof, planted new apple trees in the orchard. On the first crisp October morning, I stood by Ellen's grave as the sun rose over the hills. The air smelled like hope and wood smoke. "See that, sweetheart?" I whispered. "They tried to sell us out. Now they're building something beautiful in your name." I rested my hand on the fence. "You were right all along. The truth leaves a trail, and it always finds its way home." Ryan joined me quietly, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "You talking to Grandma again?" "Every day," I said. "She's the only one who listens without arguing." He smiled. "What's she saying today?" "That I did okay," I said, sipping my coffee. "And that it's your turn now." He nodded, looking out at the fields. "Then I'll try to do her proud." "You already are," I said. We stood there in silence for a long time, watching the light spill over the land. The same land they'd tried to take. The same land my father built, Ellen loved, and I almost lost. And for the first time in years, I felt peace settle in my chest. Steady, quiet, alive. Weaver Acres had survived, and so had I. Maybe that's what legacy really is. Not money, not property, but the stubborn refusal to let love die. When people ask me what I did after all that, I tell them the truth. I planted another apple tree. Because some roots deserve to keep growing, even after the storm. The end.